ahead and jump over to the running back. That's kind of the good stuff anyways that people really
Yeah,
care
let's
about.
do that.
And so let's start here. Listen, and I don't think we're really breaking any new ground with talking about the first two guys, right? You have Bijan Robinson, who is the unicorn, the alpha of this class. In my mind, a tier of his own. There's no other
Yeah.
running back with him. It's Bijan and everybody else. Bijan is going to test off the charts at the combine. He's 6'2", 21 years old. 257 carries, 1,500 rushing yards, 18 rushing touchdowns. He is an elite pass catcher out of the backfield as well. 314 receiving yards and only 19 receptions. He was 11th in yards after contact per attempt, first in missed tackles forced, third in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was ninth in carries of 15 plus yards. He's just elite at everything he does. The only thing that you really could probably say is he fumbled 6 times in his career. He's got to clean that up a little bit. But other than that, that's about the only thing you're going to be able to say about Bijan Robinson. We don't really need to spend a whole lot of time talking about Bijan Robinson. He's going to be
No.
drafted in the top probably 15 to 20 rounds of the draft, or 20th round. Top 15 to 20 overall pick. Maybe he slides just a little bit lower than that, but I think a team's going to fall in love with him and is going to take him higher than that. I don't think he falls past that. But then you have Jahmyr Gibbs, who he's kind of a similar guy that he doesn't have a ton of question marks surrounding him, but I think there's enough stuff we can at least start talking about it. I assume he is also my number 2 overall in this class of running backs. Is he the same for you?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so just kind of paint a picture, and then so he's 5'11", 200 pounds. That the size, that's going to be a problem. We're gonna have to see what he comes in at. Does he come in a little bit heavier than that? They kind of ease some of that worry, that concern with him, because running backs that are sub 200 pounds do get to be a little bit limited. Does he end up being like a DeAndre Swift type, but a guy who's probably only going to see 15 to 18 touches per game? He's never really going to be a true workhorse because he is a excellent pass catcher out of the backfield. Had 44 catches last year for 444 receiving yards. He did only have 151 carries, but he had 926 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. Not overly efficient, 45th in yards after contact per attempt. He was also 57th in missed tackles forced per attempt. But he was 37th in carries, 15 plus yards, and 8th in yards per route run. Like I said, excellent pass catcher. But the size thing is probably going to be the biggest area of concern. But what are your thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs?
Yeah, I think the size and some of the stats you were citing about missed tackles forced and yards after contact like that, I think that goes hand in hand with each other. But to me, like I'm willing to look past that. Like that's not going to be a problem unless he gets drafted by a team that's trying to make him be something he's not, right? Like he's not like a fantastic inside runner, but he runs with patience, burst, great feet, acceleration. And for the majority of us who play in PPR leagues, it's the hands and the pass catching that and the route running as well. It's not like he is just a dump off swing pass type of running back. Like he can run routes. If I was watching a couple of games, like I said, and I saw him lined up in the slot. I saw him lined up out wide. It is only going to be a problem if you take, completely different situation, but somebody like Mike Gesicki, right? And you try and make him like an inline blocking tight end, like that's not going to work. But when you put him outside and you let him do what he's good at, we've seen him be, plenty good in terms of a fantasy asset. And I think it's what we have here with Gibbs. I know he's getting the Alvin Kamara comps a ton. I've seen that a lot. But Alvin Kamara was like 214, 215 pounds. Like you said, Gibbs coming in at, he's listed at 200. So, we'll have to see what he weighs in at.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, I think what he brings to the table, like, I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who's going to get 25 carries. But in today's NFL, we don't see that anymore, anyways. And so, like, he's probably going to be a part of a committee, and that's just what most running backs are these days. And I think that's fine. Like, we see guys like Aaron Jones or Tony Pollard who can still thrive and be, constant contributors, and for fantasy football purposes. Let's keep it going here, and let's talk about the next guy. I know we both have him at 3, and that's Zach Charbonnet from UCLA.
Yep.
And it was kind of frustrating because we thought he was coming out last year and he decided to go back. Good news is because a lot of these guys that do go back for another year tend to drop off, and it really hurts their stock. Well, that did not happen with Zach Charbonnet. Yes, he's an older prospect. He is 22 years old, but he's not quite Najee Harris whenever he was coming out. I think he was 23, I believe, whenever he was coming out. But 6'1", 220 pounds, 194 carries, 1,300 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns. He is also a more than capable pass catcher out of the backfield, 37 receptions, 321 receiving yards. So he can be a guy who can be a true three down workhorse back. Some of his advanced numbers: 13th in yards after contact, but he was 14th in yards after contact per attempt. He was 44th in missed tackles forced per attempt, fifth in carries of 15 plus yards, and 29th in yards per route run. I think there's a lot to like with Zach Charbonnet. I think he could be a guy that goes in the maybe late second round, possibly early third round in the NFL draft. I know once we get past really these top two guys, there's going to be a lot of conversation. You're going to see a lot of different people have these guys at different spots. For me, just everything that Zach Charbonnet brings to the table, I think that his ability to be a true workhorse. Some things that I will say with watching a little bit of him is he does tend to get a little bit upright in his running style, which kind of can hurt you and kind of can lead to more injuries and stuff like that. Him being 6'1" does tend to lead to that a little bit. But other than that, he is an overall a really solid prospect across the board.
Don't have a ton to add to that. He's a three for me because he's like the guy that I next have like the fewest questions about, right? Like, would we have preferred him, especially for dynasty purposes? I want to see these guys come out as early declares. He obviously did not. You mentioned the 37 receptions he had. That is not an outlier either. He had 24 catches the year before, but 6'1", 220 pounds. Like, the size is there. He can handle the workhorse type of load. He's a big, tough, athletic dude. It's like a no nonsense type of runner. Like, he just gets downhill quickly, but like he also has more than enough like wiggle and elusiveness, like especially for his size. So Charbonnet is someone who I was pleasantly surprised by when I started watching him a little bit. So going to be interested to see what how he tests, and like you said, the draft capital is going to be the biggest thing, and to see his landing spot. I think after this is where we're going to start to have a little bit of, not necessarily disagreement, but where we start to differ here a little bit. I'm going to throw Zach Evans here at number 4. This is where the questions start to roll in, right? Like, he is someone who is at a really like head scratching collegiate career. Like, he was a very highly touted recruit. I think he was number 1 overall out of Texas. He was a 5-star kid the year that he was coming out, went to TCU. You kind of see his height and weight listed a little bit differently. The most recent one that I have seen on Ole Miss's website was 6 foot 215. So the size is there. Ran a verified 4.51 coming out of high school, but he only plays half a season his second year at TCU, ends up with like a turf toe injury. He's put on the shelf, doesn't play, transfers to Ole Miss, gets beat out by a true freshman. So he hasn't had that, true workhorse role. Kind of looked like he was headed that way his sophomore year at TCU before he got hurt, but he's going to be leaving college with just 320 career touches. And like that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for us in fantasy and in dynasty leagues. If you're going to be investing in a guy, you don't necessarily want the guy who's had, 700, 800, college touches. But it's just a question that we have. I think he's a tough runner. He has solid speed and burst. He has enough athleticism for his size. Like I said, the verified 4.51 coming out of high school. You'd expect that to maybe get a little bit better whenever he comes into the combine. Not a ton of receptions, again, because he's never had that full workhorse load, but definitely showed good hands when he was targeted. So it's just going to be really interesting to see what the NFL thinks of Zach Evans. But through my first quick pass through, I thought he was a really solid back, and I just like the way that he ran. Not afraid to put his shoulder down, but has that athleticism and juice to make people miss in the open field as well.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting prospect because I think at times he looks like just an excellent runner, right? But then there's other times that it really makes you scratch your head, and like I like some vision issues that like he just clearly doesn't see holes. Like, there's a couple of games that you'll see if you go and watch that he completely just misses. Like, there's a wide open lane
Yeah,
right to the left
yeah.
of him, and instead of hitting that lane, he just goes straight for it and runs right into a linebacker. And it's like, did you not see that? Did you, and so like, I don't know, like there's definitely some vision concerns in terms of just overall efficiency that he did not have that either. 65th in yards after contact per attempt, 78th in missed tackles forced per attempt as well. Those are neither one of those numbers are good, but he was 24th in carries of 15 plus yards. But he was also 102nd in yards per route run. So we're going to have some concerns there, especially how good of a pass catcher can he be? Is he going to end up being like a limited type player, somebody that maybe that you look at like a Jamal Williams type, who's just going to be kind of casted into a role of, or Ronald Jones, or somebody that all they do is just kind of that first and second down banger. For me, at 4, I have Sean Tucker out of Syracuse, and he also has some concerns with his profile as well. He lists at 5'10", 205. He's going to be somebody that I want to see where he grades in terms of his size as well. Is he a little bit lower? Is he a little bit higher than that? But as long as he comes in above 200 pounds, I think we'll be fine. I think there's a lot to love with Sean Tucker, but there's also some things, because if you look at him this year, he kind of fell off a little bit, didn't have as good of a season as he had in 2021 and 2022. He had 204 carries, just over 1,000 rushing yards, 5.2 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns, but he had 37 receptions for 262 receiving yards. But in 2021, he did have more carries, but he had 1,500 rushing yards and a 6.1 yard per carry and 12 touchdowns on this, with also 249 receiving yards. So it was not as good of a season for him out of Syracuse. Now, Syracuse, their offensive line is okay. I went and looked that up. They were like 53rd in the country, so about as average as you can get. Right there in the middle of the road in terms of offensive line. It's not like we're talking about Syracuse having some powerhouse offense or anything like that. So, I mean, he was kind of the engine for that offense. In terms of his advanced stuff, again, not really anything sexy. He was actually 114th in yards after carry per attempt and 73rd in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was also 37th in carries of 15 plus yards. But this is a guy, when you watch him, I mean, he has elite long speed. He's elusive. He's a good receiver. I think he has the ability to be a workhorse at the next level, because he has shown those. But also, he tends to kind of lack creativity at times, and tends to, his vision is also somewhat suspect. But I think there's a wide range of outcomes here for Sean Tucker. Like, I can see a team falling in love with him because a lot of the stuff that he brings to the table. But I could also see, maybe he just ends up being kind of more of a pure committee back at the next level. I think he does have the ceiling that could end up being a guy who maybe ends up being a RB2, in fantasy football. Maybe not a guy that's going to be some RB1, but I think like an RB2 type of upside is there for Sean Tucker. So I did put him here at number 4. So we both have somebody different at number 5 as well. I really want to kind of talk about your number 5. But let me get mine out of the way really quick, and then we can move over to yours. So I just want to hit on Kendre Miller real quick out of TCU. You kind of talked about him a little bit with Zach Evans, 6 foot 220. He is only 20 years old, which is a positive. 224 attempts this year, 1,400 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns. He was also 12th in yards, or he was 31st in yards after contact per attempt, 25th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 13th in carries of 15 plus yards. But he was 141st in yards per route run. He's not really a great receiver out of the backfield. Again, another guy that I feel like that is probably going to be maybe a little bit more of a first, second down option. But he has excellent burst in and out of his cuts, prototypical size. He doesn't. But the thing is, he doesn't really run like a player that's 220 pounds. He tends to avoid contact at times and kind of runs away from it, which can be a little bit of a problem, especially for a guy that's 220 pounds. He tries to be a guy who's 205 and kind of, dances around a little bit sometimes. But overall, I think he's a really, really solid prospect. I think somebody that I think an NFL team could fall in love with, probably a guy who goes 3rd or 4th round, in the NFL draft. So, that's where I have Kendre Miller. I have him at 5. So, Cody, you have Devin Achane at number 5, and I think he is a kind of a polarizing guy, because I've seen people have him as high as 3, but I also see other people have him a little bit lower. So why don't you tell us about Devin Achane and just kind of what your overall thoughts are on him?
Yeah, but I mean the non-believers, the haters, the detractors are going to point to his size, which is that is completely fair. Listed at 5'9", 185, so more than likely smaller than that, right? Like that is not, workhorse size. He's not going to go into the NFL and handle, 20 plus touches per game. Like that's not going to be his thing. Like, even if he surprises us and, he packs on some weight, specifically for the combine, and he gets up to, let's say he gets up to like 195, 198, like he gets close to that 200-pound mark, which if he's, 5'8", 5'9", would actually be relatively fine, right? Like, we're not talking about someone who's, 6 foot, 190 pounds. Someone like a Chuba Hubbard, I think, from a couple years ago, who's a little bit on the smaller side. But if you want to talk about someone who has game changing speed, like legit, like verified track speed, it's A Chain. The way that he moves is just it's different, man. Like this is going to be one of those ones that like the landing spot and the draft capital is going to play a huge factor in terms of where he ends up, ranked in beginning of May after the NFL draft. Like if he can get to a place where they're going to scheme him up, I don't know, let's say 10 touches per game, majority of those coming in the passing game as well. Like he's going to do just fine. And then you want to talk about the fact that he was in the SEC, so we're talking about Texas A&M. He got a workhorse role this past year. He had damn near 200 carries. I think it was like 196. He had another 36 touches through the air. Like I said, it's going to come down to his size and the draft capital landing spot. But this dude is a lot of fun to watch. Like I said, verified, track level speed. The dude's just, he's just different in the open field. And then, like I said, doing it going up against SEC competition as well is another feather in his cap.
That speed is what and his what he brings to the table. I think is what a lot of people love about him. I do want to mention there is another guy here that because when you look at A Chain, like you are correct. So there's a lot of stuff that I think is a positive for him because efficiency wise he wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible either. 34th in yards after contact per attempt. He was 44th in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was 21st in carries of 15 plus yards, and he was 127th in yards per route run. Overall, I still think with his home run speed, I think he's going to be able to find a place, in the NFL where
Yeah.
teams are going to be able to utilize him. Maybe it's again, it's probably going to be much more of a committee type situation here for him. But in the right system, in the right situation, I mean, he could definitely pan out. A lot of people comped him to Austin Eckler, which I think is something that people could, you take a look at with him. I think that possibly could be the range of outcome. I will say here, per PFF, HA did force a missed tackle on 29% of his career attempts, which is tied for fifth among Power Five backs since 2020. So I mean, overall this year maybe wasn't as efficient in terms of that, but in terms of overall over his career, he has done a really good job. So if he does come in a little bit heavier, maybe he comes in at 195 or something like that. I think it could end up being somebody that the guy that I wanted to talk about is very similar, but nobody's talking about him at all. Like nobody. You look around, nobody's mentioning this guy's name, but you're going to hear it, and you're going to start hearing it more. And that's Keaton Mitchell. Now he does come from a smaller school, East Carolina, but everything about this guy, he's very similar. 5'9", 185, very similar in that way. This dude is absolute burner as well. He was clocked this year at 23 miles per hour, which is one of the fastest runs we've seen from anybody this year. In terms of his efficiency, he was 34th in yards after contact per attempt. He was ninth in missed tackles forced per attempt, first in carries of 15 plus yards among all running backs. And he was top 30 in yards per route run as well. On 201 carries, he had 1,452 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns. He had a 7.2 yards per carry, and he had 27 catches for 251 yards. I know a lot of people haven't heard it, but he's also an early declare as well. He just turned 21 years old, so that is also a positive for him as well out of East Carolina. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to test really, really well in this class, but people are going to knock him because of his size. But where I was coming with this is that you have A Chain, right? Who everybody's falling in love with. Now, again, I get it. He plays in the SEC, the Power Five school. Keaton Mitchell plays in the American Athletic Conference. East Carolina. They're playing against teams like Cincinnati, USF, BYU, stuff like that on a regular basis. So obviously the competition level isn't as great, but everything else he brings to the table is absolutely off the charts. And I think he could be a guy that we should be talking more about. Yes, he doesn't have the size; he's 185, just like A Chain is. But I just see a lot of people having A Chain at top three, top four. But I hear nobody talking about Keaton Mitchell, and I think that could be a mistake. I think he's going to be a guy, especially at the combine. I think he's going to come in, he's going to blaze the combine. think he'd be a guy that runs a 4.3. Obviously, we have a guy named Chris Johnson who actually played at East Carolina, came from there as well. So I do like Keaton Mitchell, and I just thought it was interesting as it's kind of going through all this that everybody was so high on A Chain, but no one talked about Mitchell. But I suspect it's because he played at East Carolina and the other one plays at Texas State.
Yeah, it's absolutely just the level of competition, right? And like the fact that we've seen A Chain, like I said, 196 carries this past year, and I think that was in 10 games as well. I don't think he ended up playing the full season. So
That being said, I appreciate everybody checking it out. Be sure, if you're not already, be sure to click that subscribe button. And if you want to, you can also join our Discord, absolutely free to join. You can find that in any one of our YouTube videos. Click the link in there. It's absolutely free. We got Debbie, we got Dynasty, we got redraft, we got everything in there. We'll be talking more and more as the things go by. We'll be back again next week. The wide receivers and the tight ends. Have a good night. Bye.